Thanks be to God. Thank you, Arnie. Open our ears, God, that we might hear your voice speaking to us in these moments together. A pastor had a problem. He had a small church, and he wasn't blessed with all the space up in front like we have here. And one of the church members passed away. Well, he didn't even have room to bring up the coffin, no place to put it. And so he thought that the most sensible thing to do would be to take one pew out, and he could use that space to place the coffin for the memorial service. Well, he thought he had the problem solved, but there were some people in the church who were upset that he would take a pew and move it. It was tradition. It had always been there. We should not be moving it. And it got so intense that the pastor said, I think it's easier to rally people together to fight to keep from moving a pew than it is to get them to fight to get people into church. Mark 13 is a powerful chapter. And in that chapter, there's a reminder that you and I need to hear. One day as Jesus was going out to the temple, one of his disciples said, "Look at this beautiful building. Look at the stones. Isn't it magnificent?" And it was. The temple was glorious. It was beautiful. It looked like it would last forever. It was gigantic, covered all the top of Mount Moriah. It was huge. Some of the stones used to build it were 40 feet long and 18 feet wide. It took 46 years to build the temple. In the front of the temple, there were 40-foot-high pillars. The temple was made of pure white marble, and parts of it were covered in solid gold, real gold. It shined so bright, it said, that on a sunny day you had to cover your eyes as you walked into it. Jesus said to his disciples, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." What? The temple? The center of Jewish life? It gave the Jewish people a sense of identity. And Jesus was telling them that one day this beautiful, beautiful, glorious building would be gone. There are people who are saying the same thing about the church today. They're saying that the church is irrelevant. They're saying that the church is dying and almost dead. They're saying that the church as a vital institution in society is finished, is no more. People have always said that about the church, but the difference is that today, now some of the people who are saying that are people who love the church. Just like Jesus loved the temple. There are people who say that the church in America is running out of time. That if it doesn't turn itself around, it doesn't have much time left. It will no longer be a live, meaningful force. Well, I want to remind you before I talk any more about the church, that this building, as beautiful as it is, and as much as I love worshiping here, is not the church. This brick and mortar standing on the corner of 6th and Grant Street is not the church. You are the church. I am the church. The people, the people together. Remember that one? Yeah. I'm the church, you're the church. Yeah. We are the church. It's people, not a building. Should we be concerned? Is there any hope? Let's consider some important truths about the church today. First of all, I think you would all agree with me that the church has what many people want and need today. We want and we need to be connected to other people. We need a connection to others. We need a connection to God. Those two wants are at the center of who we are and what we're about here at Zion United Church of Christ. Back in the 1700s, Songwriter Charles Wesley and his brother John and Richard Pillmore were holding an outdoor service when a mob attacked them with stones, and they ran for their lives. They found a spot to hide. When night came, they found a deserted spring house where they lit a little fire and they cleaned off their faces and brushed the dirt from their clothes and felt safe again. And Charles Wesley pulled out a pencil while they were in this little shelter, and he wrote a hymn that has been sung by Christians for years and years. Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, while the nearer waters roll, while the tempest still is high. Wesley was thankful to God that they had found a shelter in the spring house. And he wrote a song about a place of shelter that is open to all people. People still need a shelter today, don't they, from life's storms. It's pretty stormy out there, and I don't mean the weather. We need a place of refuge. People still need a place where they can connect with one another and with God. The church has what people want and need today. The interesting thing is that the last place that people look most of the time for these things is the church. Years ago, there was a car company that had their salespeople wear a button that says, "I am not a salesman." It seems that surveys showed that one thing that the average person dreaded the most in buying a new car was dealing with the salespeople. They associated car buying with high pressure. And so they wore a button that said, "I am not a salesman." And something like that has happened to the church in the eyes of many people. They want God, at least in some form. They want spiritually healthy relationships with others. But the last place they want to look for these things is in the church. So what do? God has called us to reach out to the world. Where do we start? We start with ourselves. We need to continually ask ourselves, what can I do to make myself more appealing to others with my lifestyle? Let's use an example. From 1972 to 1991, American exports of automobiles to Japan tanked. It declined about 20%. At that same time, German exports to Japan increased more than 700%. Yet the German automobile companies worked under the same rules, same standards as the American companies, and here's what the difference was. The Germans paid attention to what was going on around them. They noticed that the Japanese drove on the left side of the road and that the steering wheel on their cars were on the right side, and their cars were much smaller. So the solution was to put the steering wheel on the right, make the car smaller, and the Japanese people will buy them. When the American Jeep Cherokee, which was built to meet all those Japanese wishes, arrived in 1992, it sold like crazy. The fastest growing churches in our country are churches that work to understand the community around them and to shape their ministry to meet the needs of that community. That might mean changing some of our worship style. It might mean using more contemporary music. It might mean, as an example, creating a drop-in center for young people. But, every community is different and has different needs. But we need to ask ourselves, if we as a church are focused on the needs of ourselves, focused inwardly, or are we focused on the people that are outside these walls? I have often said that I love our stained glass windows, but I wish they were turned around because we get to see all the beauty. And from the outside, looks very plain. Doesn't make sense to me. So secondly, We need to do a better job of telling our story. If we have met God in this place, or anywhere else for that matter, we need to tell our friends and neighbors about it. If there's something special about this church family in your heart and your life, why not share it with the people that you care the most about? If the people in this church family have ever rallied around you in a time of need, time of grief, time of sickness, you need to share that good news. Tell other people about the family. If you are excited about something that we're doing here, a ministry of this church, share it with other people. It's not just that people today are not responsive to the church's message. People are confused about what the church's message really is, and especially today, with all this that's gone on with the campaign, the presidential campaign. And people don't know what we're really all about unless we care enough to get the word out and to tell that story. Researchers say that people who don't attend worship services, many of them would consider coming. When? Every survey that's taken, the answer is always the same. When do they come to church? Who said that? What'd you say? Yeah, when they're invited. When somebody asks them to come. Why are you here today? What brought you into this church? What keeps you a part of it? I would venture a guess that some of you have been here all your life. I know that. I realize that. But there are many who are part of our church family today who came to this church as a result of a meaningful personal relationship with someone who said, hey, why don't you come? Check it out. We think you'll like it here. People outside these walls wonder if we care enough about them to tell them about God's love, about our ministry here at Zion. We need to look at our church and at the community and the ways that we can make our ministry even more responsive to the community needs. We have a team who is working on these very things these days. But we also need to do a better job of telling our story. Another example, in 1978, when the Shah of Iran was kicked out, a much more conservative, fundamentalist government took over. And they took over the country of Iran, and they began to take away people's freedoms, their basic freedoms. Women were hit the hardest by these new laws. The new government banned women from most government and university jobs. The female cabinet minister in charge of education was executed. Women were not allowed out of their houses unless they were covered from head to toe with thick veils. Women who let their hair or their wrists, imagine that, show outside would be attacked and beaten on the streets. Pictures of women were airbrushed out of books. Many girls were kicked out of school and they were denied an education. But when change came in Iran, some women used these restrictions. And here's what they did. They wore makeup, or they let their hair show to protest. Now, let's apply that to our country today. In a nation like ours today, with all its division, a person of faith who truly loves others, a person who is kind, who is accepting, who is generous, will stand out in the crowd. People will notice. Let's wear our makeup. Let's let our hair show. Let's really, truly try to live more like Jesus did. But we're human. Sometimes we fail. We get grumpy. We get judgmental. We get unloving. And at times, we do more harm than good. That brings us to my last point. Sometimes we need to evaluate our relationship with God and with one another to see if we're really keeping it real. One key to a vital, growing church is that people have a strong relationship with God and with one another. There's a story about a rabbi who was flying on a long trip, He was quite elderly, and his grandson was on the same plane to help him on the trip. The rabbi was flying up front where he would be more comfortable, and the grandson was sitting in the back where it was less expensive. The rabbi was sitting next to a scientist, and they had some nice conversation. The scientist noticed that the grandson kept coming back and forth to check on his grandfather, making sure he was comfortable, making sure he had something to drink, helping him with whatever he needed. The scientist said to the rabbi, "You know what? That's wonderful. It's beautiful how your grandson treats you. My children and grandchildren would never travel anywhere with me and certainly never put so much effort into helping me out on the trip." The rabbi said, "It's really something simple. You believe in evolution. By that theory, your children are one step further from the apes than you are. I believe that man was created in the image of God. By that theory, I am one step closer to God than my children are. So my grandson treats me accordingly." Now, the point is not whether we believe in evolution or not. The question is, how close do we live to God? How much of our time do we give to God? It will show. We'll be kinder. We'll be more loving. We'll be more generous. We'll be more accepting of people who are different than us. God's light will shine through us. I like the title of one book. It's called How to Be a Christian Without Embarrassing God. Sometimes we feel like we might be an embarrassment by something we say or do, but that's the exception and not the rule. One day, this beautiful building, as lovely as it is, will be gone. But God's church, never. Buildings come, buildings go, but the buildings are not the church. We are the church. Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." We're going to be just fine wherever we meet. These days, let's look at ourselves more closely. We need to tell our story more boldly, and we need to draw closer to God than ever before, and we also need to remember to draw closer to each other. Amen.